Hi, in this video, I want to talk a little bit about science and the scientific method and scientists. I recently made a video about why we should think like a scientist and we should use the scientific method and think thoroughly, look for dissent, and gather different pieces of information. And it occurred to me that there are some interesting caveats that I want to share that have been coming up, especially as science has been a big theme, given COVID and so forth, and various religious and science, this tension between religion and science. Anyways, it seems like a worthwhile thing, anyways, I left off that last video with kind of two provocative statements that I think are important to dig into. One of them is that scientists don't always use or think like scientists, and there's a lot of error and so forth in the world of science. And because, one, science are human and they're also subject to bias. And the other sort of semi-provocative statement is that science isn't actually real, and nor is it right. And I'll explain that in just a moment, but let's take these one at a time. So something I've been paying attention to lately is something around just like the fallibility and imperfection of scientists. So science is a methodology, and yet when we think about science, we think about scientific journals or actual scientists and so forth. And the methodology is one thing, but the people are another one. And given that scientists are human and the people who are reviewing science are also human, that means that they also can be subject to their own cognitive bias and so forth. And one of the ways that this happens is that scientists will go into a scientific process with the desire for their guesses or hypotheses to be right. And this can mean that sometimes they don't gather enough data. They find data that meets their conclusions. And this is, of course, like the confirmation bias. They pick the data that works for them, that confirms their what they believe. And this can either be just in that cognitive bias, or it can be actually intentional cherry picking. Another sort of way the cognitive bias can slip into the scientific community is that some scientists might actually, fall to groupthink. The topic might be off limits or sort of not considered relevant or important within the scientific community. And so some people might not ask the question. And I'll share a couple articles that I found to be interesting about this coming out of like the time of like COVID and just like ways that scientists sometimes make mistakes. And, and some of the things, just like as an example, that like once something becomes like not allowed to talk about, people might not actually research it. The other challenge that kind of comes up in the world of science is that scientists will, or especially as a population, it's easy for us to confuse people who are making like mathematical predictions or stuff that's based off of data from the past, trying to make predictions about the future, like may or may not work. Another thing is that a scientist is only quite as good as the data that they have. And so they might actually, say, hey, given the data that we have, this is true, this isn't true, or we don't know something. But unless someone's actually done the research on it, we don't actually know if that's true or not. And so I just wanted to point this out. Check out some of the articles. I think they're pretty interesting. And that brings us to point two. Fortunately, science isn't actually about having certainty. This is what I mean when I say science isn't necessarily right. We can come with outcomes, but science is more just actually a method. It's a way of coming up with a guess, testing the guess, and then some of those guesses might be wrong. And this is why we have the scientific method that can help us process information. So I think about this almost all the time because there's yard signs around my neighborhood that says, in this house, we believe that, and then it has a bunch of usually like progressive slogans, and one of them tends to be science is real. But that's not a true statement either. It's not something that can be real. It's just a process. It's not actually about the conclusions. And in fact, every time, even if you can do a conclusion, you can run the experiment, you can find the data, the whole point of the process is for people to keep on double checking and keep on asking questions. And so it's instead is a method or even like a cycle that can prompt us to keep on seeking more information, keep on evaluating things, keep rethinking our assumptions. And the point of it is to actually look for dissent and to keep getting new information, to keep on adjusting our conclusions. And kind of what this means is that science is actually about doubt. Doubting the conclusions of science is actually the strength of science. To be able to say, that's an interesting outcome. Let me try it again. Let me try it again. So it's not, doubting science isn't necessarily actually the problem. It's actually what makes it good. And that being doubtful and questioning is actually a strength. And I think that getting more clear about this could be a lot more helpful. I noticed that a lot of political conflict that comes up is just about whether or not people saying this is true, this isn't true. Now, I want to actually give an example that's just, not a modern example, or kind of, but so back, let's say, a handful of centuries ago, someone might have the hypothesis that the world is flat. And they might think like, okay, well, how would I run the experiment on that? And they might go to the top of a mountain, and they might look out and they see, wow, it looks like it's flat as far as I can see. They might actually, spend their whole lifetime walking, and they could just walk and walk and walk and walk and walk, and it would still appear to be flat. And in a certain way, that means that this person has used the scientific method, come with a conclusion, and it's actually a functional, operable conclusion. For all the needs that a given individual might have, they don't, assuming that the world is flat and running on that assumption and believing that to be a great conclusion, is totally a functional person. And they can run with that, and you can build societies and civilizations on that faith that the world is flat without running into any problems. It's only when you need to actually try to, navigate like a super long distance around the Earth, or once you start having planes, you start going into space, that you then all of a sudden get new data. And that new data then makes you need to come up with a new hypothesis. And that new hypothesis then can get proven by, all sorts of different ways you can run the experiment to realize that the Earth is actually a sphere. And so I'm just sharing this in the sense that, I said in the last video that truth isn't something that's like a perfection that we're going to arrive at. It's actually something that we're always moving towards. And one of the best ways that we can do this is to keep on getting input from other people. And so I want to point out that the fact that we know that certain scientists have used incorrect data, or that they came to improper conclusions, is because we are still using the scientific method. Using this process gives us a chance to discover our mistakes, to recognize that what we understood about the world is actually no longer true because now we have new information. And I think that this is something that's going to be really important for all of our conversation, is that we can gather information, come up with solutions, but then realize that this is an ongoing and iterative process. When we get more information, we need to adapt our understanding of the world. And this is super relevant because the theme that we've been talking about for such a long time is that we're dealing with complex, wicked problems. They don't lend themselves to simple solutions. And so we really do need a process. It's a cycle where we're continually checking ourselves. There's an article in Scientific American called "If You Think Science is Right, Then You're Wrong." And it's written by a woman named Naomi Oreskes. And I think it summarizes this really well. She says, science is not simple, and neither is the natural world. Therein lies the challenge of science communication. What we do is both hard and often hard to explain. Our efforts to understand and characterize the natural world are just that, efforts. And because we're human, we often fall flat. The good news is that when that happens, we pick ourselves up, brush ourselves off, and get back to work. Now, this can be frustrating. That means it takes a lot of time to gather data. It means we have to test our conclusions. It means that sometimes we have to act without certainty and actually live without certainty. And that also means that we might end up being wrong sometimes. But the beautiful thing here is that life is an iterative process. And so a process that is iterative also fits with the world that is iterative and ongoing. And just to clarify, when I say iterative, I mean something where there's an outcome, and then that outcome creates a new reality, and then that reality creates a new outcome, and so forth. So this is, all been part kind of like an extended metaphor about how we can think about the really tricky things that we have to deal with in our society. And if we develop our thinking skills, that can also teach us that we're really actually just trying to get through increasing shades of adequacy. We're just trying to get to something that's better than where we are. All we can say at any point in this big life experience is, okay, this is good enough, not good enough. If it's not good enough, let's find a way to do it better. And so we can keep on improving our current situation. And then when we get that improvement, then we can improve upon that. And we also recognize that we might not actually find objective truth. We don't actually need it, though. All we need is a process that can help us continually move towards more truth, more goodness, and more beauty. We can always get better, but we're never going to be able to be perfect. And that brings us to, I think, is the real gift of democracy. We don't actually have to figure this out all by ourselves. In fact, we can't figure it out all by ourselves. We need each other to make sense of the world. And fortunately, we're not alone. Diverse perspectives and diverse lived experiences and diverse life paths all help us see and understand the world more clearly. And then what's more, having there be diverse perspectives and beliefs and ideologies and worldviews and political perspectives, those all can function to keep us in check. Miki Kashtan, one of my favorite sort of thinkers around facilitation, says dissent is a gift. And if we can recognize that when someone disagrees with us, that means that there's an opportunity to learn better about what's going on, there's a way that being in relationship helps us become better thinkers. And so this, I think, brings me to the need for all of us to just acknowledge the value of being in this ongoing dance and tension between self and other, between my team and that team, between this group and that group. That is going to be ongoing, and it benefits all of us, and it helps us then affirm both our independence and our interdependence. So this little series about thinking and sense-making has been part of this long series, and it was sparked by one of my favorite quotes from Oliver Wendell Holmes. And in that quote, he reminds us that the simplicity that we can find without considering complexity is of very little value. But there is untold value in the simplicity that we can find on the far side of complexity. And so in this journey that's been going on since May, and I don't know how many videos there are in this series now, navigating complexity and the understanding that we live in a complex world and we're facing wicked problems has brought us to this need to develop ourselves and our own capacity for thinking and sense making and finding peace with the world. But obviously, democracy and politics and political culture and all of these things that we're finding so challenging right now is about way more than how we show up as individuals. It's actually about how we're in relationship with each other. And so if you're interested in all about that, don't worry. We are about to come full circle on this journey. We have gone from simplicity to complexity, and we're about to get back to simplicity. We're about to find the simplicity that's on the far side of complexity. And that's going to be coming up in the next couple of videos. But for now, I'm going to close this out with another quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, the one who sparked this inquiry. He says, "Every now and then, a man's mind is stretched by a new idea or sensation and never shrinks back to its former dimensions." As we learn and grow, and we learn and grow together, we will be changed by the experience. And that is a real gift. So stay tuned. Coming next, I'm going to be talking about self and other and the journey to get to omnipartiality, which is being biased in favor of everyone. And then after that, I'm going to transition us to a brand new series where I'm going to start to explore how the heck do we actually manage all of this diversity and dependence, especially when most people are not going to be ready for this. So stay tuned. Thank you for being part of the Omni-Win project. I wanted to just name that we have a podcast, and there's essay versions of this, and there are video versions of this, and there's all sorts of resources out there. You can come find them all at omniwinproject.com. Now, thank you very much, and have a great day.